Hello, welcome to the critical move of Telesur. Sino-US relations are further strained following controversial statements by the Trump administration regarding Beijing's claims over the waters of the South China Sea. Is it true that the Xi Jinping government is pursuing these claims illegally while carrying out a bullying campaign to control the area's resources, according to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo? Is it also true that the White House objective in this matter, very overseas, is to preserve stability? On the other hand, how are the consultations on a code of conduct in those waters? By China and ASEAN countries? Let's deploy the board. It starts the first move. After the declaration of the U.S. government regarding the efforts of Beijing on the South China Sea, the Foreign Ministry of China, through its spokesman Zhao Lijian, expressed the following. The United States says China has not officially declared the demarcation line in the South China Sea. This is far from the truth. Issues of Chinese sovereignty and our interests in the South China Sea have been dealt with throughout history. China has exercised effective jurisdiction over the islands, reefs, and waters in the South China Sea for over 1,000 years. In 1948, the Chinese government officially declared the demarcation line in the South China Sea, a dotted line that was not questioned by any country for a long time. Our territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea are based on historical and legal evidence, are in line with what international law dictates in this matter. China has never tried to establish a maritime empire in the South China Sea. It has always treated the coastal countries as equals. China has exercised utmost restraint in safeguarding its sovereignty, rights, and interests in the South China Sea. However, the United States has always refused to join the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea, has frequently withdrawn from international organizations and treaties, has selectively applied international regulations, and has often sent a large number of warships and military aircraft to intensify militarization in the South China Sea, with the objective of promoting a strong logic of power and hegemonic practice. The United States is the destroyer and troublemaker of regional peace and stability. The international community sees that clearly. China's position on the arbitration and its award of the South China Sea is consistent, clear, and firm. The arbitral tribunal exceeded its authority by violating the principle of consent of the states concerned. There are obvious errors in the facts and application of the law. Many countries have raised their doubts about it. By exaggerating the arbitration case, the American side is serving its own political ends, is an abuse of the international law of the sea, and China will never accept it. As a country outside our region, the United States, based on selfish interest, would only like to see instability in the South China Sea, is doing everything it can to cause trouble, alienate relations between the countries of the region and China, and disrupt the efforts of Beijing and ASEAN countries to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. The dispute will be resolved peacefully by the parties involved through negotiations and consultations. The United States' attempt to sow dirty discord will not succeed. We express our strong discontent and our firm opposition to the wrong actions of the American side. We urge the U.S. to stop causing trouble on the South China Sea issue and not to continue on the wrong path. China will continue to firmly safeguard its sovereignty and security in accordance with the law, firmly maintain its friendly and cooperative relation with regional countries, and firmly maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. Long but very necessary these statements by the Chinese government during his visit to the UK and as part of the US international decreed campaign against China. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo welcomed London's recent actions against Beijing. I congratulate the British government on its principled responses to these challenges, has made a sovereign decision that ban Huawei from future 5G networks, has joined other free nations in condemning China's unfulfilled promises on the Sino-British treaties, has generously opened its door to Hong Kong people who are only seeking to flee from some freedom, has suspended its extradition treaty and extended its arms embargo to China, also to Hong Kong. We support the United Kingdom's sovereign determination and believe it has done well. We want every nation to work against that kind of activity. It's those actions. It's not about language. It's not about words. We want each nation to work together to reject the efforts of the Chinese Communist Party in all dimensions. It's up to the United Kingdom. It's up to all countries. We hope that we can build a coalition that understands this threat and works collectively to convince the Chinese Communist Party that it is not in its interest to promote such behavior. As you can see, this visit to the European country by the highest representative of the foreign relations of the United States was a good one. Let's put these two powers that are leading the race for world leadership on the geopolitical map. United States and China. What is the world's leading power? The United States and China are facing a dispute, not only commercial but also geopolitical, with the aim of establishing themselves as the world's leading power. The American nation is located between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It is bordered to the north by Canada, to south by Mexico, and through Alaska has direct access to the Arctic Circle. It has an area of 9.83 million square kilometers, not counting its unincorporated territories in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific as colonies. Its capital is Washington, District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C., and its most populated and cosmopolitan city, New York. The United States has arguably the largest national economy in the world in nominal terms, with an estimated 15.7 trillion in GDP, equivalent to 1/4 of global GDP. But in terms of purchasing power parity, its GDP is the second largest on the planet, behind China. The country is the main capitalist force in the world. It has been one of the pioneers in scientific research and technological innovation since the 19th century, in addition to being the main industrial power. The U.S. is the world's third largest oil producer and the largest importer of this product, the main reason for its imperialist policy. It is also one of the leading producers of electric and nuclear energy, liquefied natural gas, sulfur, phosphates, and salt. In parallel, the People's Republic of China, located in Central Asia, with an area of 9,596,960 square kilometers, is the third largest country on the planet after Russia and Canada. It borders 14 states, Vietnam, Laos, and Burma in the southeast, India, Bhutan, Nepal, and Pakistan in the south, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan in Central Asia, Russia, Mongolia, and North Korea in East Asia. In addition, it shares maritime borders with South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and the Philippines. China is a power that controls an extensive coastline from the Sea of Japan in the northwest to the Gulf of Tonkin in the south. Its coasts are bathed by two strategic seas, the East China Sea and the South China Sea. Agriculture is of vital importance to the national economy. China has a great deal of mineral resources. Iron reserves are estimated at 40 billion tons. Its refined tin production accounts for 8% of the world's tin. It has others such as magnetite, mercury, manganese, lead, zinc, copper, and uranium. Since 1996, it has been at the top of the world list for the production of steel, coal, cement, fertilizers, and televisions. It is the third largest producer of cars after the United States and Japan. The Asian giant is the world's largest consumer of energy and the leading producer of solar panels and wind turbines. It is a nuclear power and has the first merchant marine on the planet. The Beijing government makes millionaire investments with development projects in countries rich in raw materials and creates alliances where everyone wins. Because of this, it has become a kind of alternative World Bank, as it has a huge amount of foreign currency. Both China and the United States are, along with Russia, the United Kingdom, and France, permanent members of the United Nations Security Council with veto power. Let's take a look at the demands that have been made on the South China Sea by Asian nations throughout history, including Beijing. How far back does the dispute go? Let's review. The South China Sea is a critical area for many countries in the Asia Pacific region. It is located in Southeast Asia and borders on South China. Its waters are home to more than 400 islands, reefs, and sandbanks, as well as archipelagos including the Spratly and Paracel Islands, which according to studies could hold large deposits of oil and gas. This sea serves as a gateway to the world's trade routes, through which some $3.4 billion of trade pass annually. All this, plus the rich seabed, has led to a dispute over control of the area. China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei claim parts of this sea strip. The conflict over sovereignty began when, after the end of the Second World War, the San Francisco Peace Agreement was signed in 1951, a treaty that did not clearly delimit who was responsible for each archipelago in the area. This omission laid the foundations for the development of successive clashes over the allocation of the island and their adjacent maritime space. Beijing bases its claims on historical reasons, claims that its right to the area goes back centuries when the Paracel and Spratly Island were considered an integral part of China. The government of the People's Republic of China formally protested external intrusions into the island and the French takeover in 1933 and Japanese in 1939. These claims gave their claims legal support. To set the geographical boundaries, the Beijing government published in 1947 a map that included the disputed island in the South China Sea. The map drew the familiar 9-point line that now constitutes the claimed boundary. Since 2012, China has included this island as part of its so-called basic national interests. Vietnam rejects the historical version of China. It claims that its neighbor had never claimed sovereignty over the island before the 40s, and claims to possess documents proving how Hanoi has ruled the island since the 17th century. The Philippines, for its part, invokes geographical proximity to the island as the main basis of its claim. Malaysia and Brunei also claim a share, which they say is covered by their exclusive economic zones defined in the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And in this context, we will mention other elements that give an account of this move by the United States against China. I invite you to check some digital information such as La Vanguardia. On July 22, the U.S. is demanding China to close its consulate in Houston. A day after the U.S. accused China of cyber attacks, the Trump administration has demanded the immediate closure of its consulate general in the U.S. city of Houston, Texas, in order to protect the intellectual property and private information of Americans, the White House announced in a brief statement on Wednesday. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said today that the United States has called for the immediate cessation of all operation of the consulate as of July 24, which is a violation of international standards and consular agreements between the two countries, as well as the attempt to undermine bilateral relations. We call on the U.S. to retract this erroneous decision, or China will take the necessary and legitimate retaliatory action. One said, adding that the closure of the consulate in such a short period of time represents an unprecedented escalation of the actions that that country has taken against China. Beijing denounced the closure of the consulate a day after the United States accused its intelligence services of supporting the cyber attacks by two Chinese hackers against companies from 11 countries in an attempt to steal COVID-19 vaccine data and military technology secrets. To date, this has been the latest episode in a growing tension between the two countries. He also said that Chinese diplomatic missions in the United States are dedicated to promoting understanding and friendship between the people of both countries. However, our embassy in the U.S. has even received bomb threats and death threats have also come to diplomatic personnel. We ask for reciprocity. The reality is that the US has far more diplomatic personnel and missions in China than vice versa. Another fact, also very important, it is brought by the Chinese agency Xinhua on July 19. Strong U.S. military presence in South China Sea undermines stable situation, ambassador says. China's ambassador on the United States, Hui Tiankai, said that strengthened U.S. military presence in the South China Sea has undermined the situation in the region. In reality, without outside interference, the situation in the region was cooling down. It was quite stable. Hui said in an exclusive interview with Farid Zakaria, host of CNN's GPS program, which aired on Sunday, in response to U.S. accusation against Beijing over the South China Sea. Unfortunately, countries like the United States, particularly the US, are trying to intervene, send in their armed forces, and strengthen their military presence in the region. The intensity and frequency are very high. He added that, ironically, the United States is not yet a party to the Law of the Sea Convention. I don't know how many people are aware of this, Kui warned. The ambassador noted that the ruling issued by an abusive court in The Hague in July 2016 was an unilateral action. We rejected it from the beginning. We don't think it's right, but some people insisted on doing it. We will not participate in such a ruling. Therefore, it is not based on a very solid legal basis. The ambassador stated that at the same time, we have a very strong position in our sovereignty on the territorial claim in the region. Our claims have a very strong historical and legal basis. He added that China wants to resolve all disputes with other countries through diplomatic negotiations. I'd like to suggest to you the reading of an article titled 2020 Test of Fire for Chinese Diplomacy, written by Fernando Prieto and published on the site Rebellion on June 26. I select some of its paragraphs. China's foreign policy in recent decades is based on two pillars: peaceful negotiation as the only way to resolve conflicts, and multilateral diplomacy, which means abandoning the alliances of the past and making a definitive break with the isolationist stance taken during the Cultural Revolution. There is only one prerequisite for establishing diplomatic relations: adherence to the One China principle, which involves recognizing the Beijing government as the sole legitimate authority and rejecting Taiwan as an independent political actor. COVID-19. The key to understanding the Chinese response is to understand that it was an unknown virus, so it looked to the work of Chinese scientists to discover what kind of virus they were dealing with. China is facing a story that, despite the lack of real evidence and the fact that it is in the realm of assumptions, serves as a diversion of several governments in the face of questionable management. India, despite the fact that the rapprochement between the two giants has been a reality, the biggest diplomatic problems have focused on the diffuse border between the two, drawn by the current control line, more than 3,440 kilometers, proposed after the military conflict of 1962 and officially accepted in a bilateral agreement in 1893, with skirmishes the mutual provocation ensuing. Both Beijing and New Delhi have tried to reduce the escalation of tension, giving priority to dialogue. Tension on the Korean peninsula. The relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang is not monolithic as it might appear, but is conditioned by mutual necessity. For China, it is essential that there be a buffer state between its border and the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, where U.S. military bases are located, and for North Korea, it means its survival by having China as its main trading partner. The United States. The relationship between China and the United States has maintained a certain stability, only marred by isolated conflicts. Economic interests have taken precedence over geopolitical disputes as both parties derive substantial benefits. For years, the relationship was uneven as Washington asserted its role as a hegemonic power, but the first steps of the 21st century show a rise of China as a new power, which has worried the United States. Hong Kong and Xinjiang. After the protests of September 2014, known as Umbrella Revolution, and mainly after the protests of 2019, the Chinese authorities became aware of the need to apply a national security law to avoid external interference in their domestic policy. The internal problems are not limited to Hong Kong. One of the main conflicts is that in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where the Turkic Uyghur minority, which professes the Islamic religion, lives, their own cultural idiocracy and the involvement of some members of this ethnic group in Islamic terrorism are a headache for Beijing. South China Sea. Territorial disputes among Southeast Asian countries remain ongoing during the pandemic, with tension rising after the deployment of 3 U.S. aircraft carriers in the Pacific Ocean, which has been interpreted as a warning to China and a show of force. Let's update more information with our correspondent Iramsi Pereza from Beijing. Greetings, colleague. Thanks for the contact. Yes, indeed. The recent intromission of the United States into South Sea sovereignty issues has come to bring even more attention to an issue related to these South Sea disputes between China and many southeastern nations. Let's remember in 2017, China and the member nations of ASEAN reached an agreement to form a code of conduct on the South Sea and to try to resolve all disputes and differences through dialogue to maintain stability in this Asian region. On the other hand, experts assure that these recent intermissions of the United States in the issues of the South Sea and the attacks against China, along with the increase of its military presence in the area, allegedly on the argument that it will defend freedom of navigation because they are not looking for anything else just to increase their influence in a maritime space through which about 30% of global trade moves. Besides, it is also known that it has a rich fishing bank, and experts also believe that this South Sea could contain important deposits of oil and gas. And that is where the United States' growing interest in interfering in these matters comes from. This is all the information. We'll keep you posted on all the details. Thank you very much, Iransi. Let's take our first break in a critical move. Remember, there is a strategic move in social media for you to participate. What is the U.S. government seeking when it is now concerned about the historic dispute between Asian nations over the sovereignty of the South China Sea? Is this another chapter in the White House assault against the emerging power? Leave your opinion. Let's take a short break. We'll be back soon.
El enfrentamiento entre Estados Unidos y China.
The U.S.-China confrontation has intensified and evolved bases beyond the commercial. Let's keep on reviewing the context. Between sanctions, imposition of trade tariffs applied on the import, export, or transit of goods, the Trump administration maintains a hegemonic dispute with China in order to dominate the market on the basis of protectionism. From the beginning of his election campaign, the magnate decided to attack the Asian giant as his main political enemy. That is why behind the commercial war against China emerged other battles, such as the technological war for the control of information. The growth of Chinese industries such as Huawei has been interpreted by the United States and its Western allies as a threat that would allegedly put the security of these nations at risk, particularly through fifth generation or 5G technology. As a result, the US government has launched a global campaign against Huawei to prevent its international partners from preferentially using this technological giant. But the rivalry between the two powers goes beyond. After the United States and Russia, China is the third country in the world to carry out a mission to outer space, something that Washington is not content with. The Asian giant has sent 6 crews into space and launched 2 laboratories into Earth's orbit. In January 2019, its National Space Administration achieved a milestone never before reached by man to install an unmanned spacecraft, the Change E4 probe, located on the dark side of the moon. Meanwhile, the United States persists in positioning itself beyond the Earth, mainly to protect its assets, including satellites used for communication and surveillance purposes. Earlier this year, Washington issued the National Defense Authorization Act 2020 Space Force, which lists the first Air Force Space Command, considering that space is a new domain of war in the world, according to the document. The renewed space race includes both the control of security and satellites, as well as the search and obtaining of natural resources, such as water and helium gas-3, energy resources for nuclear fusion. We start the analysis. We have from Mexico Professor Adolfo Laborde Carranco, researcher, writer, and expert in economic and international issues. And from the United Kingdom, we have Jorge Martin, editor and member of the editorial board of the magazine America Socialista. Welcome, both of you. I'd like to start with Professor Laborde. Professor, we have one more time on the geopolitical board this tense relation every time becomes more tense between the United States and China. Now circumscribing the historical dispute between Asian nations over the sovereignty of South China Sea, and U.S. authorities claim to say that it's China, the one who is trying to impose its criteria as a way of a murder in the zone. What do you think? Well, that is, it's a part of a reconfiguration of other regional actors of the Pacific. Truth is that there is a status that comes from the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, where there was a whole process of decolonization of many countries that somehow, as in the report it said, frontiers, boundaries are not very clear and have to do with regional security system, specifically with the agreements that the United States has with Japan, the Philippines, and New Zealand and Australia. They speak about there is a situation that Chinese people are not agree with. We have to see that from the perspective of the increasing of capacities and Chinese influences in the military and economical context. There are also other elements to analyze. Of course, there's another intensity war. There are direct conflict. We see the Hong Kong case. We see the minority of China. We also see it in the commercial, with the exchange of commercial narrative of the states with China, which have reached an agreement to buy more from the United States. But that's not enough. And at the end, there's a confrontation between these two powers in the context of Pacific Asia. And from this context, the natural zone of economy in China, well, logically, this breaks all the idea that United States of having a control over the region. Not only the control, but also the strategic alliances. Thank you, Professor. Stay with us. We go to Jorge Martin. Jorge, what's in this region of Pacific Asia that the United States is so interested on and therefore it hits against China? Well, the factor that I see in all of this, despite everything that you have said so far, which was very good, very detailed, it's the fact that the capitalist economy worldwide is facing an unprecedented crisis ever since the year 2008, but now it's been aggravated with the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has led to the United States, the first world power in the world, the strongest one, to adopt a protected policy. That means that it's trying to make other countries, the rest of the country, to pay in the midst of their crisis. And when Trump says that we're going to make America great again, he says we'll make America great again on other countries, and has entered into a dispute not only with China but also with the European Union. It's a commercial dispute in which one the United States wants to win a higher position in the market, and also inside these blocs, also in the European bloc. And therefore, all of these things we're seeing right now has a lot to do with this background, because we cannot think that the United States is interested in the human rights when the United States has been occupying militarily Iraq, Afghanistan, and promoting this war status all over the world. It doesn't have anything to do with human rights or the right of the world trade commerce or the circulation of ships. It has to do with a commercial dispute. The other side of this coin is that in the last 30, 40 years, China has developed a very strong growing development. Obviously, China is a capitalist country and has tried to strengthen its alliance and to protect its commercial routes and its raw material sources. And the first part of this strategy is the Sea of the South China. We can find arguments. There's a doubt here. I have a doubt. So according to you, China, it's a capitalist country, while it's ruled by the Communist Party. Yes, this is a very small contradiction. Well, you can see that China, where it used to rule state, community, centrally, right now it's ruled by a capitalist economy. Everything is produced by the private sector, and the state has a main role in the economy. It represents the private sector. Very wealthy people are members of the Communist Party, and therefore we have a capitalism with state intervention. And the communists, in any way, as I was saying, it's a country that is trying to assure its commercial routes because it's a very exporting many products. And obviously, the first chain is the South China Sea, which is very important, not only for the commerce in China, the trade. Also, it represents approximately the 30% of all the products that are transported through the sea. They go through the South China Sea. There is another aspect here that I still have a doubt on. Starting from the explication that you're providing for us, how the communist ideology is not capable of showing success in the economical area with this geopolitical, and how Chinese authorities have been explaining over the socialism basis adequate to the reality of this Asian country. Well, I don't agree with that description, because socialism, the abolition of private over the production means, it's a system that can show huge improvements, like Russia, that passed from being an agricultural country into an industrialized country, a world power producing steel etc. But in my opinion is that China is not a communist country or socialist. It's a, it's a country where the private property domains over other sectors. And this sector is based on an state investment of technology, the acquisition of technology over the face of foreign investment, and a massive exodus of people from the rural areas to the big cities where they work in these huge private properties with exploitation conditions, such as the angels described in the Great Britain of 1850 when they spoke about the exploitation of the working class in England. For instance, Foxconn is one of the most big factories in the world where over 1,000 workers work. And it's a private factory that produces components from big technology companies, especially for Apple, uh, making conductors for iPhones, etc. And workers work there for very long hours for very minimum salaries. And they practically live inside these factories. It's a high level of exploitation. And this has increased the level of living of the Chinese people, the ones who live in the rural areas in very worse conditions. And that has increased the condition of exploitation in the working class. That class that has no union rights when they go to a protest. So that is why, for me, this determines the character of this economic system that rules China, and not a name that can be given by a party that it's ruling the government of China right now, which is the Communist Party, which is full of multimillionaire people and many private companies. For example, Huawei, it's a company that it's implied in this conflict with the United States and with the UK, where Huawei was forbidden to participate in the development of technology of 5G technology in Great Britain. It's a private company, it's a Chinese company, but also it's a private one that is ruled by the Chinese state with its external conditions. It's a private company that exploits workers. That's what it is. A capitalist country. It's not a communist country. That is at least what I think. We should investigate because there has been a lot of controversial. We also should put over the board how much the state apports on this basis we'll be talking about. How much the state has put on disposition of its own people, especially in the context of this COVID-19 situation. Thank you, Jorge. Professor Laborde, based on these things that we were talking about, in the context of the eruption of the COVID-19 pandemic on one hand, and the reality that the United States is living, we take these two elements because when it comes to analyze the tensions between these two powers, these are elements very important. Is that right? Of course, we have these two elements that have presented as a surprise, and they both are a risk map, and somehow they transform the optic of their relation with its alliance. And it's not only that, but also that modifies the vision of China in the context of the developing. We have to remember what it was said in the last meeting of the Communist Party, where they spoke about a strategy of development inside. So there are many things. And there is also the modification of the vision of cooperation that they have, and some elements that say that since 2013, those elements has a lot to do, of course, with the root of this silk, which is a cooperation program that today mobilizes, because it's called today the face mask diplomacy, which puts aside a complete focus of transfer capacities of infrastructures to be able to ride this capitalist expansion, firstly in Asia, Central Asia, Europe, and then in Latin America and Africa, to be able to modify the cooperation through the health cooperation. So these modifieds, or the instruments of the external policy, and modifieds, of course, the necessities of China to be able to keep a relationship with its allies. And of course, it will modify the economical relations with these big value chains that at some point they will modify their behaviors in the foreign investment directly. Also, there is the issue of Japan that somehow is promoting a lot of financial resources that companies migrate to other destinations. So therefore, this will modify the economical phase, the chains of value, and of course the logical of the business. Professor Laborde, thank you so much, and also I thank the professor for We'll see you soon. Let's take another break in our critical move. Remember, there's a strategic move in social media for you to participate with us. What is the U.S. government seeking when it is now concerned about the historic dispute between Asian nations over the sovereignty of the South China Sea? Is this another chapter in the White House assault against the emerging power? Leave your opinion. Stay with us. We'll be right back very soon. Process to the other countries of Asia takes relevance due to its growing leadership in economic matters. Let's review what role Beijing plays in that part of the world. The Asian region has become one of the most prominent poles of economic growth. The People's Republic of China assumes a leading role due to the sustained growth experienced in the last decade, which has led it to become the second largest economy in the world. The emergency of China as an independent global economic power has highly impacted the expansion of links with ASEAN countries. Last year, Beijing and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations adopted the historic vision of the Chinese-ASEAN 2030 strategic partnership, which aims to build alliances based on economic cooperation. China has remained the main trading partner of ASEAN over the last decade, and the bloc is the second largest trading partner of the Asian giant, with two-way trade exceeding 587.8 billion, and mutual investment exceeding 200 billion in 2018. With a considerable extension from the southern coast of China to Singapore, covering the waters of 8 other countries, Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Brunei, Thailand, and Indonesia, the South China Sea is another point of interest. Beijing is committed to resolving disputes through negotiation and consultation with the countries directly involved, managing differences through rules and mechanisms, and achieving results that have translated into mutually beneficial cooperation. We continue with the analysis. We have from Argentina Marcelo Ramirez, Content Director of Asia TV, geopolitical analyst in Smoke and Mirrors and Asia in Motion. Quite an expert in Asian issues, Marcelo, as always, it's a pleasure to dialogue with you in a critical move. You see, we put this element, adding others we received from former experts, to reflect around this every time more tense and complicated relation between United States and China. How are you, Ray? Thank you for having me. Yes, probably what we are seeing is the reality of the confrontation of two models. We have to focus more on what Trump is saying right now, and to be able to start to see a little bit more where it's heading to the real objective of being able to liberate a global model that the United States in some way bleeding out when we see that the big companies, big US companies, the ones who are ruling the world, they practically have no homeland. And therefore, there is a model that Trump is trying to break. So China has adapted very well to the global model and thought about moving on. That's why it's a commercial and natural enemy from the model that Trump is trying to impose. This is why we have started to see today, and that's what I think on this situation. It's something that has been going on previous events. And for Trump, is in reality to be able to break a global model. And obviously, China will be.
Este modelo globalista,
This
Marcelo,
global
estuvo
model
posicionado durante
was possessed
administraciones
during the
anteriores en
former
Estados
administrations
Unidos.
in the
Por
United
ejemplo,
States.
la
For
reciente
instance,
administración
the recent
de Barack Obama,
administration of
dadas las
Barack Obama,
características que tiene este año
and the
electoral de
characteristic of
Donald
this
Trump, una
electoral
vez más
year,
se pone a
where
juicio
Donald
del
Trump once
electorado,
again
nos
puts on
preguntamos,
trial of the
¿pudiera esta
voters,
relación
we
entre
wonder,
Estados Unidos y
could
China
this relation between the
cambiar
United States and
llegado el
China
momento
change
en que Donald Trump
when
abandone la Casa Blanca y, como
Donald
dicen las
Trump
encuestas, se posicione
leave the White
Joe
House
Biden al
and Joe
frente
Biden may
del
reach
Partido Demócrata,
its position in
seguidor
front of the
entonces del
Democratic
modelo
power,
globalista que venía
following
manejando la
of the
administración Obama?
model
¿Pudiera
that
cambiar esta
Obama
relación con China?
administration is following. Could this change? I really think that in the basis it won't change because the model that Biden follows is a global model that at some point when the markets open, if it's interest, the final project, it's a world where states have a secondary role and practically will come to disappear. So when I think the connection will come to take place. United States, it's just a bipolar and transnational instrument for saying somehow. It's ruling the world according to their own benefits, products, mercancy, goods. And so I think that sooner or later, if it whether if it's Biden, whether if it's Trump, at some point, I doubt that something comes to an agreement. They are two rivals that will continue to face each other because their projects are antagonic. And we see that we have to understand that the United States is coexisting, and we are witnessing a confrontation between two models of capitalism. And sooner or later, so taking that situation, putting that situation aside, as I said, quite an expert of the Asian reality, I'd like to ask you about a code of conduct that I understand it's been managed between China and other countries to. How are those going on? Well, that code of conduct was a little bit questioned by the Western because basically I think that except from Vietnam that maybe has the hardest position, other countries from the southern Asia, maybe we could talk about the Philippines, they really need a relationship with China because this is something that is strategic. China cannot give away the control of what they call the South China Sea because the country is going through a situation where the world trade commerce, almost the 80% of the exportation of oil from China, when we have 60% of purchase of oil from Japan and from Korea. They all go through that, so it's a very strategic place. Besides, China doesn't have a direct access to the Pacific. It's surrounded by some sort of islands. There's a whole arch that China is leading to that. So if it gives away that region, I think it's a secondary, all the gas and oil that can be found in the Sea of China, and not somehow that the resources. So I think it's a problem that goes along with a military aspect that China needs to control to be able to maintain their commercial flows and the exploitation of products and fuel, which are vital to maintain the economic are, are above in China. So somehow those countries want to negotiate with China because they are commercial partners, and by being in this influence zone alongside countries such as China, it's very conditioned by the reality of having a commercial agreement. So what we see here is a balance between the interest of defending the sovereignty, the maritime sovereignty in this area of the Chinese Sea, and the necessity of maintaining good relationship with China. So it's what they're trying to do is open dialogue channels, and we see in this sanction in the United States, which obviously the relationships are back tense again.
Tal cual. Bueno, Marcelo,
Well,
un millón de
that's it.
gracias
Well,
por
Marcelo,
haber
thank you
accedido
so much
a
for
este contacto con Telesur
being with us here
para
in
darnos
Telesur
luces sobre lo que está
to give us
ocurriendo
lights
en
about
ese
what's
punto
going on right
de
in that
nuestro
point
planeta
of
y
our
que
planet,
evidentemente
and that
irradie
obviously
para bien o
lights
para mal
off
en las relaciones
for
entre
good
China y Estados
overrun
Unidos. Un
in the
abrazo, hasta la
relationship
próxima.
between the United States and China.
Muchas gracias,
See you soon. Thank
Vamos a
you.
las conclusiones.
Let's go to conclusions.
Washington se dice preocupado.
Washington is concerned about claims on which Beijing bases its ongoing dialogue with other Asian nations regarding its sovereignty in the South China Sea. Another example of the White House clear interference in matters that concern only China and those nations. Another example of the so-called commercial war as a pretext for the West to boycott an emerging power and to position itself in the new chess as the number one power. And there lies precisely the great fear translated into violence and aggressiveness of the traditional hegemon. Will the eagle succeed in overcoming the dragon? There are too many elements to doubt it. It is enough just to look at how the American nation is going on the inside, at the gates of a controversial presidential election. For today, we close the geopolitical board.